welcome or welcome back to my channel Read with Kim. And today we are going to talk about the entire series of so many books. The entire series, oh my goodness, of Mistborn from Brandon Sanderson. And I am and I'm really talking about the 7 books. So it's Mistborn Part 1 and Mistborn Part 2. And if you haven't, go and check my videos because I did a video of each of the books, except I think for the last one, the last 2 that we're gonna talk here. And also, I'm gonna answer some of your questions. Now, this video is not gonna be a review of every single book because I will just repeat myself since I already did the videos. But I really wanna make like a wrap up and yeah, and like talk about my opinion, my thoughts, and you guys asking me sometimes like, oh, can I read one part and then the other one? Should I read the books in specific order? And we are going to talk about that here. I'm going to answer all your questions. This video is going to be kind of like a spoil free. If I have to spoil something, I'm going to warn you because in order for me to talk about one book, maybe I have to spoil something about the book that it was writing before. So let's start. I have to start saying that I discovered Brandon Sanderson through this series. This was my first encounter, my first book that I read from him, and I completely fell in love of the way he writes. And from there, I've been reading a lot, and I'm planning to read the entire Cosmo world. So basically, Mistborn is a series which is divided in 2 parts. So the part number 1 of this series, it is like those 3 books. So we have Mistborn, then we have the Well of Ascension, and then we have the Arrow of Ages, which is number 3. Then we have the second part of the series, which is basically 4 books. Well, it's 3 books plus a novella. So the number 1, we have The Alloy of Love. The number 2, it is The Shadows of Itself. The number 3, it is The Bands of Mourning. And the final book, which I said is a novella, but it answers some questions that we might have, it is The Lost Metal. So that's a complete Mistborn series. Now, did I read all of them? Yes, I did. And the first question that I want to answer it is, do you need to read part 1 and then part 2? And listen, listen carefully. It is recommended for you to read number 1 and then go to number 2. However, they're completely different stories, even though they have like a little elements in the part number 2 from book number 1. But it's 100 years after, like it's 100 years of difference. Okay, so it is completely fine if you want to read the part number 2 and then you read the part number 1. It's not gonna miss anything. However, it's, as I said, it's better that if you want to read in order, you read part 1, so now you start knowing who's Bean, who's Kessler, who's Ellen, who's the law ruler, what's going on in this world. And then you can go to the second part. Now, the second part is more like about, it gives me like a Sherlock Holmes vibes. So it's more like a local, I would say. It's more like, in my opinion, it's like a local. And Miss what it was completely like a world war, like a kingdoms, and it was like a lot. And it was really, really emotional. Now, are those series both 5 stars? I have to say, my opinion, even though I'm fan of Brandon Sanderson, I think we can accept and we say, okay, this is not his first, like the best work that he did. And in my opinion, no. In my opinion, Mistborn Part 1 is way better than the Mistborn Part 2. I feel like in Mistborn Part 1, we really discover this little girl who was thief, and then she is discovering herself. She was being abused by the brother, and then we have Kessler, and then we have the Raw Ruler. It's a lot of secrets, but it's a lot of emotions, and literally, I was like this in the entire first part of the series. Like I was completely, I couldn't even like stop reading those books. And in the part number two of the series, I had a really, really hard time to get into the story. I think, yes, like Wax, Wayne, Marcy, Ceres are really, really good characters. It's completely different. It's not fast paced. And in the book, I would say two, three is when they mention more about Bean. Then it's not that they mention, they take it like as a like reference. Oh, this happened like a long time ago, and then you were like, oh yes, I remember that because I read it already. So that's when they connected both stories, but it's a completely different time. um, so yeah, I don't. If you planning to read the entire series, yes, but be aware that the second part it can give you a little hard time about getting into the story. However, it's very interesting and it's very like good to know what's happening after they got the law ruler, and then 100 years later what happened. So in some way like it's connected. So it's good if you really want to know, but you don't have to. I feel like if you read only the first part and you not really want to get into the second part, you're completely fine. You're really not gonna miss any like super important information, unless another fan of Brandon Sanderson want to explain to me and tell me no, you're completely wrong. But in my opinion, you can only stick with the part number one. Also want to talk about the character building. Like the character buildings, I feel in this first part of the story, the Mistborn part one, Brandon Sanderson did an extraordinary job about knowing who is who. Like I felt after I finished the book, I knew perfectly why being act the way she act. I knew perfectly why she was saying the specific things, how she's coming from, why she was so defensive, and also Ellen coming from a very like rich family, and he wants to be a gentleman, but Bean doesn't let him to be a gentleman, and it's like a lovely, amazing love story there, and how he finally convinced her that she's enough and that she's so beautiful because even though she is, and she's the main character, she doesn't believe that about herself. So it's a lot about self development and self love and self growth and you're enough. And I love that. And also we have the Lord Ruler, and we have Kessler who died because he wants to like survive. I mean, he died because he wants to like rescue and protect Bean and everything. So that part I love it. The part two, we have Wayne, Wax, who are more like a funny thing. I feel like there was a lot of jokes, which it was perfectly fun. It was entertaining, but it was joking. It was like less emotion, and even though we know the story of Wax, I feel like I didn't know him exactly. I didn't know a lot about him. It was like a little emotion. I love. I'm gonna spoil something. When the first wife was actually like planned, like it didn't have like a human. It was someone to protect him, and I also like the kind of like the law but no law between Marcy and Wax. And I'm not gonna say the end if they end together or not because there is another woman there who is a sister that I something I do not appreciate. I'm not really a fan of like love triangles unless like they're really good built. But I feel love triangles, especially with sisters. I'm like, okay, he is engaged with a sister, but you guys are kind of like floated to each other. I don't know. It was bizarre, even though nothing happened. I was gonna spoil. About to spoil something. But yeah, so I was not really fan of that love triangle. I feel Wayne also was kind of like the clown from Wax all the time, and I would love to have like more knowledge and more about his story and have more important things to do. I feel the stories are completely different. Kind of like objective, we'll say. Like the first one was completely like, and the second was more chill, more like have fun, Sherlock Holmes, discovering the crime, who killed what, and it was more local. So that's my opinion. I also want to say that about trending and popularity and people talk about. First part is super well known. Everybody's talking about Mistborn. I feel like people even compare and even say that it's way better than Akotar. I love Akotar, but yeah, Brandon Sanderson is my favorite author. And it was like really, really wow. So when I finished that, I had like huge expectations for the second part, and I was like, why nobody talking about the second part? Like, just like three people were talking about the second part, even though I was like looking on YouTube about the second part. Nobody like it. I found maybe like three, four people talking about that, and I was like, what's going on? And because I read Warbreaker, who is not very trendy, but it's an amazing book. I was like, okay, maybe it happened the same. And then when I started reading them, I was like, okay, I bet like not many people read the second part, or they were like trying, and they were like, I can't. So in an way of popularity, trendy people talking, definitely part number one is way more trendy than part number two. I don't think it's because we need to talk more about that. I really feel it was not the best work of Brandon Sanderson, even though it's a series where he's so famous for or well known for. I think the second part was like, I don't know. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I was like so high expectations because I read the first one. So maybe if you read the second one and then you read the first one, you'll be like, oh my God, it's a big change. But because I was here with Mistborn first one, I was expecting half the same for Mistborn too. Oh, wrap him up. First part, 5 stars. Second part, I would say 3.5 stars. Let me know. What do you think? I'm about to jump into another series now. I have to say, if you want, maybe read Mistborn Part 1, take a little break and read maybe a standalone, could be Warbreaker or Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and then go to the second part. Maybe it's different. Like opinion that you will have because you will have a break that I did because I read the series like from 1 to 7 and I was like, okay, it's completely woo like this. The last book is a novella. It has not really into the part of the story, but it answers some questions that you might have and I did have, and it was in the it was like in the midst of part one moment, but it also talked about Wayne, Wax, and Marcy, and it's like, oh, this happens here, this happens here. So you kind of like more connected to the stories and understand more things. And it's cool to know because if you plan to read, that I do plan to read the entire work from Brandon Sanderson, it's cool that you know Wax, and then you know Wayne, and then you know all the stories. So in that part, yes, go and do it. Pretty excited when I talk about fantasy books. Fantasy books is my favorite genre. Well, one of my favorite genre. No, it's actually my favorite genre. And Brandon Sanderson is my favorite author, so I can keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking about the same over and over and over. I love this. But anyway, let me know if you read the entire series. I'm so happy. I can even do this. I am so happy I did it before the end of the year. It makes me very, very happy. So I'm gonna see you next week with a new book chapter. Bye.